So yes, it's true that the Rondel dagger is absolutely one of the best, one of the most important weapons for fighting in armour. But it's not a magic wand. Dagger fighting in armour's really hard. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. Now I've actually been teaching dagger combat in an unarmoured context since, this is going to be shocking, the late 90s. That's right. Some of you watching this might not have even been alive then. Man, I'm old. But a lot of my life has been devoted to looking at the treatises, particularly Fiore and Vardi, the Italian 15th century treatises, looking at the use of the dagger in the medieval period. But here's one of the elephants in the room for HEMA people. A lot of the dagger material really makes a hell of a lot more sense, but it is also very different in armour. What do I mean by that? Well, first up, the Rondel dagger, I think probably most people will agree, is a weapon which is peculiarly adapted, evolved for fighting in armour. But one of the ironies is that within the HEMA world, we predominantly actually practice dagger fighting out of armour. Now, one thing I have to completely admit is that I have only been regularly or semi-regularly been doing armoured HEMA, or harness fecton as some people call it, in the last couple of years with any kind of seriousness. And a lot of the techniques that I've been looking at from dagger fighting, which I've known for years, I can run through all of the plays of Fiore and Vardi, and I can teach it. I've taught it all over the world. When you put armour on and when you have a room full of people with armour on, some of them don't work very well. Now this is something I think which HEMA people aren't necessarily, in some cases, expecting. In some cases I don't think they're ready to hear it. But actually, if we look at Fiore's text, he often refers to things being better in armour or better out of armour. Now I'm not going to drill down, maybe we'll look at some more detail of some of the examples he gives in the future. But just as a basic concept, he does talk about techniques which might be better with a longer sword, might be better or doesn't need a longer sword. He actually says these things. And equally in the dagger section, he specifically sometimes says, you know, this guard is much better in armour. And you can see the reasons why. Now, here's the funny thing. When we started training the dagger techniques that we knew only too well out of armour, in armour, we actually find three things, okay, three notable things. Firstly, some of the techniques that we know and do all the time out of armour just don't work in armour. Now, I'm not going to give specific examples here because I think that would make a really good standalone video, so I'm intending it to do it one day when I'm in harness with a friend who's in harness and I can actually demonstrate why those techniques don't really work really at all in some cases, like not even at all in armour. Even though you might think, oh, well, you know, I'll just learn all Fiore's dagger material and then I'll do that in armour. Well, it doesn't work in armour. You literally can't do some of those techniques. They just don't work. As a basic example, so you might be wondering, well, what on earth is Matt talking about? As one basic example, when you are wearing arm harness, your arms become a bigger diameter than they are otherwise. And when you couple that with gauntlets, there is a much bigger circumference around your wrist, especially with the flared cuff and the lower arm defences, the vambrace, which mean that the angles you get against the opponent's equally armoured arm, which is also therefore a larger circumference, just kind of don't work. So I'll give one example, and we'll show it one day in armour, where you come over someone's arm and then you lock the blade on the other side. You can't do it with most gauntlets and most arm harness. It just doesn't work. There are some exceptions. We found that some people's armour does work with it, but the majority don't. Okay, we'll come back to that and look at that at a greater point, another time. But the other couple of things we noticed were that the openings available to you with a dagger in armour are greatly reduced. Now, I need to qualify this with something. When you see people in armour doing things in armour in historical reconstructions, unfortunately, very often you see them with all the lovely looking plate armour. Here's my left pauldron. You see them with all of this nice looking plate armour on, But they don't have anything in the gaps. Okay, now I've been guilty of this as well. I've thrown on my plate armour in order to demonstrate things or even to reenact. However, if people miss out the mail, okay, then they're missing out a huge part of the kind of defensive armour that was worn at the time. Okay, so generally speaking, we would pretty much always have mail in the armpits, mail at the collar, usually but not always mail at the inside of the arm, or that's obviously a much less fatal target than the armpits or the neck. Mail skirt around the crotch, sometimes mail brayettes as they're called, so it's kind of like shorts or hot pants that are made of mail. So mail in all of the gaps. So a lot of time when you can see sort of reconstructions of combat, the people are wearing their plate armour, and any time there's a stab with, you know, could be a longsword or a poleaxe, or indeed in this case we're talking about daggers, could be a dagger. Whenever there's a stab in an armpit, we just class that as game over, fight finished, he got a stab in the armpit. But here's the thing, and this is I would say this is the third main thing. Mail is also armour, okay? Just because you've stabbed in somewhere that plate isn't, there's a very good chance with a properly worn and fully deployed armour of certainly of the 15th or 16th centuries, or certainly 14th as well actually, there should be mail there, okay? Mail was here before the plate. And in the 14th century, they simply put plate over the mail. They're wearing a full mail shirt, even under a coated plate, or later on a corazina or a standalone breastplate. So just because armour doesn't hit the plate, just because it goes in a gap, doesn't mean it's going to go anywhere, okay? Because there should be mail there, and mail is not easy to compromise. The fourth kind of bonus point I want to mention is that when a person has got a full harness on, and I've alluded to this in a second, there are really very few openings. And one of the things that we noticed is that as you go forward in time, and you should perhaps expect this as a degree of evolution of the armourer's art or science, there are fewer openings. If you look at my pauldron, it's freaking massive. Okay, if you go back to the 14th century, when Fiore's techniques were being devised with the Rondel dagger, they're wearing little spaulders. Yes, indeed. By the time we actually get to the Pisani Dossi version of Fiore's manuscript, we do in fact start to have some large pauldrons in evidence. But the majority of armours in England or France in the year 1390, for example, have small spaulders that are either integral or separate with the arm harness, and more exposed armpits, essentially. And it's not just the armpits, it's everything else. The fold and the tassets become more protective down at the crotch area. The wings for the insides of the arms, getting access to the inside of the arms, become more curved and more covered. It becomes harder to get in there. The gauntlets, which originally you've got hourglass gauntlets with a nice big opening into the back, and the daggers are shoved into the back of the gauntlet, those start to get narrower and more closely fitted, sometimes with articulated wrists, to the arm armour, and so there's less of an opening at the back. And so on and so forth. I mean, helmets and everything else gets generally speaking, unless someone happens to be wearing an open helmet, generally speaking, tends to get better designed, more covering, and it is therefore not easy to bypass all of the plates. Now, one of the things that we found in training dagger stuff is, frankly, if you just want to buy some time and just don't want to get stabbed, you can sort of close yourself up. If you cover close up your arms, get the backs of your gauntlets pointing towards you, and close up your armpits and almost get into like a boxer's stance, then basically there's very few openings that a person can get in to stab you. It's like, well, my dagger's just hitting helmet or pauldron or breastplate. Where do I stick it? And so there's another example of how just taking the techniques of Fiore's dagger section and doing it armour, well, what are you stabbing? you're not going to stab a dagger through a helmet or through a breastplate or through a pauldron. It's not going to go through. So it's more about trying to either wrestle the person or find those gaps to stick a point. And the last point I want to finish on as well is, although all of the major gaps, the armpits, maybe areas around the neck and throat, the skirt, all of this are covered by mail, Some people, I think, are under the misconception, I would say, that you can put a Rondel dagger blade between plates and into gaps. You can't, okay? I mean, okay, literally speaking, yes, I can put my tip in there, but it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to go anywhere useful. It's certainly not going to stab a person. So fundamentally, the headline here is armour works. And just because you've learned techniques with a knife or a dagger from whatever treatise you happen to study from, or even from any other martial arts, you know, be it Filipino martial arts or Japanese, whatever, just because you know how to use a knife or a dagger doesn't mean you can use it usefully in armour. And in fact, the fighting in armour with a Rondel dagger is more about understanding the armour and how to possibly compromise it or the person inside it, and less about the actual dagger techniques themselves. And as I've said, there are certain dagger techniques which just don't really work in armour, and we'll go into some bigger depth. We'll actually show some examples of these another day when I've got an assistant with me, probably Gavin or one of my other colleagues, maybe Drac, and we can get armoured up and we'll actually show you. Anyway, there we go. The main headline here, and if you take just one thing away from this video, apart from the fact that armour is really difficult to overcome and get past, is that don't always think that when a stab, whether it's with a sword or a dagger or a poleaxe or anything else, goes into a gap in plate armour, that's game over. No, there should be mail there, filling that gap, doing what mail is supposed to do and had done for hundreds of years, protect against cuts and stabs. So, armoured fighting, very difficult, quite complex, but also a lot of fun and very, very interesting. Anyway, I have been Matt Easton. I will, of course, continue to be. Please make sure you're subscribed, and I hope you'll see you back on the channel really soon. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.